A rocket landed in Suwayda less than 3 hours after government forces entered the city. Then came more explosions in Damascus. The Ministry of Defense was in ruins, and the area around the presidential palace shook. Not a full-scale war, but no longer a dialogue. What seemed to be just a local ethnic clash between Druze and Bedouin militias quickly escalated once Syria intervened. Israel immediately acted. Intense airstrikes followed. The targets weren't just the fighters, but the Syrian government in power for barely a year. Tel Aviv claimed it was acting to protect the Druze community. But what's happening looks more like a military chess game, where Israel no longer waits, but strikes first. Why did Israel move now? Is this still about ethnic protection or a warning aimed at both Turkey and the al-Shar regime? And Syria, after 13 years of civil war, could it be spiraling into a new conflict this time, fueled by regional power struggles? In this video, we'll decode the entire Suwayda crisis from local skirmishes to regional confrontation and explain why it may be the biggest geopolitical turning point in the Middle East since the 2023 Gaza campaign. You can't understand why Suwayda erupted without understanding Syria's nature, a country never designed to be easily governed. Unlike homogeneous nations, Syria is a layered map where religious and ethnic groups aren't just different, but interwoven, suspicious of one another, and in many cases, ready to open fire. Sunni Arabs making up half the population are numerous, but have never truly held all the power. The Alawites, just 15%, once controlled the entire state apparatus under Assad's rule, fueling simmering resentment for decades. The Kurds, 10%, established their own de facto state in Rojava, and to this day trust no one but themselves. The Druze, only 3%, hold strategic ground in the south, with a unique trait: they follow a private religion, don't preach it, don't share their faith, and trust no protector but themselves. Throughout the civil war, the Druze didn't fully side with anyone. They built barricades, took up arms, and formed a semi-autonomous zone in Suwayda, the very place now becoming a geopolitical flashpoint. Israel says it's protecting the Druze since a large Druze community lives inside Israel itself. But this isn't just about ethnic defense, it's about staking influence and sending a message to anyone daring to enter southern Syria from Damascus to Ankara. And once you understand this ethnic mosaic, you'll see even a small clash can spark a region-wide airstrike. Because in Syria, the ethnic map is the kindling. When Bashar al-Assad stepped down at the end of 2024, many believed Syria had finally turned a new page, a chapter of peace and reconstruction. But the truth was far more complex. Assad didn't just walk away from power, he left behind a legacy, a shattered nation fragmented by ethnicity, divided by local armed factions, and scarred by more than a decade of civil war. And the one inheriting this wreckage was Ahmad al-Shar. Not a general, not a religious figure. Al-Shar is a Sunni politician once exiled in Europe with no private army, no backing from old power blocs. But he had something Syria never had before: a government swiftly recognized by the international community and open support from Turkey. Upon taking office, he made 3 pledges to democratize the state apparatus, to end Iranian military involvement, to protect the rights of minority communities, including the Druze and Kurds. At the time, many saw him as naive. But within months, al-Shar surprised analysts. He successfully negotiated with Kurdish forces, bringing the autonomous Rojava region back into Syria, not through warfare, but by granting internal self-rule. His policy toward Israel shifted markedly as well. He agreed to a demilitarized zone in the south, curbed Hezbollah's activities, and pledged to keep Iran-backed forces away from the Golan Heights border. To the west, al-Shar was the ideal figure for a post-war Syria. But to regional powers, he was the easiest to test, and then Suwayda exploded. The al-Shar administration believed concessions would bring stability, but in the Middle East, concessions without strength only open a power vacuum. And into that vacuum, Israel was the first to step. The Suwayda crisis, therefore, isn't just an ethnic conflict, it's the first real test for the new government to see if it can truly govern the nation or if it's merely a fragile coalition surviving on goodwill from others. And from this moment on, al-Shar's softer approach will be pushed to its limits. It all began, not with tanks or rockets, but with a vegetable vendor. On July 11, 2025, at a temporary checkpoint set up by Bedouin militias on the northern outskirts of Suwayda city, a Druze street vendor was beaten after a dispute over transport rights for goods. In most countries, this might have been just a civil dispute, but in Suwayda, where every group is armed, has its own forces, and a history of hostility, it was the spark. Within 24 hours, targeted kidnappings began, deliberate, retaliatory, and spreading fast. Both sides, Druze and Bedouin, started abducting civilians, traders, and travelers. No one trusted local authorities anymore because no one was left to enforce order. On the night of July 13th, Druze militias surrounded Al-Makwaz, a residential area, with a large Bedouin population demanding the release of hostages.
Began a week ago with clashes between Bedouin and Druze.
Videos from the scene spread across social media. Pickup trucks with mounted guns, rifles, handheld rockets right in the heart of a once calm city. Under public pressure, Syria's Ministry of Interior released a vague statement about protecting lives and property without clarifying who would do the protecting. By the next morning, Syrian troops officially entered Suwayda, and that marked the second fracture. Many of the deployed units were brigades composed mainly of Sunni personnel, which enraged the Druze community. Some troops were accused of firing on civilians during hostage rescue operations, prompting Druze factions to sever all communication with Damascus. One local commander even declared, "If the central government sends troops here as an occupying force, then we will receive them as enemies." The situation was now beyond control. What began as an ethnic clash turned into a three-way standoff: Syrian army, Druze militias, Bedouin militias. Each side armed, each side bearing grudges, and no one believing in the idea of a neutral party anymore. On July 14th, Israel struck. As Syrian forces moved reinforcements, a series of precision airstrikes hit military convoys on the outskirts of Suwayda. Less than 12 hours later, Damascus came under attack. Syria's Ministry of Defense air defense systems near Mezi airport and even the area surrounding the presidential palace all were hit. This was no longer a local crisis. This was a declaration that southern Syria no longer answers to Damascus. And it marked the first collapse of the stability model that al-Shar had painstakingly built. Israel didn't wait for Suwayda to stabilize. Israel didn't wait for Syria to negotiate. Israel didn't need a Security Council, didn't need an international resolution, just a reason that was good enough. And in July 2025, that reason was protecting the Druze community. Just 24 hours after Syrian troops entered Suwayda, the Israeli Air Force launched a large-scale airstrike campaign, starting with attacks on Syrian military convoys near the city's outskirts. But that was only the beginning. In less than 12 hours, the scope of the strikes expanded. Syria's Ministry of Defense hit. Air defense systems near Mezi airport disabled. The area surrounding the presidential palace in Damascus shaken. Tel Aviv declared, "The operation aims to protect the Druze community, an inseparable part of Israeli society." But what unfolded pointed to a far larger objective. Israel didn't just react, it deliberately chose the timing right as the al-Shar government faced its first major crisis and lacked the capacity for a full-scale military response. The real goal wasn't to rescue civilians. The goal was to send two strategic messages, first to Damascus: "We don't trust you." Promises to protect minorities only matter when backed by real control. And you, have failed at that. Second, to Ankara. Southern Syria is not a place for Turkey to expand its influence. For months, Turkey had been al-Bashar's main backer, from humanitarian aid to brokering the reintegration of Kurds into Syria's political framework. But for Israel, any power that comes too close to the Golan Heights is a threat, and no warning speaks louder than precision missiles landing in a rival's capital. According to military sources, this marked the first confirmed use of F-35 stealth fighters by Israel in an airstrike on central Damascus since 2020. That says one thing: they're not worried about Syria's air defenses and not concerned about consequences. At the same time, Israel's Ministry of Defense confirmed that over 1,000 Druze citizens had illegally crossed from the Golan Heights into Syria within 1 week, under the pretext of supporting the local community. The incident sparked fierce debate in Israel's parliament. Is the government protecting minorities or exporting ethnic conflict beyond its borders? In the end, these airstrikes achieved what no political statement could, forcing the al-Bashar government into complete passivity, unable to defend its territory, and no longer credible in the eyes of its own people. And to Israel, that was the first strategic victory in a new Middle Eastern game, one they didn't wait to be invited to, and one that plays by no rules. On the night of July 17, 2025, after 6 days of violence and airstrikes, a ceasefire agreement was signed in Ankara with the United States and Turkey present as supervisors. On paper, it marked a retreat from war. But on the ground, it felt more like an admission that the Syrian government no longer controlled Suwayda. According to the published terms, the Syrian army must completely withdraw from Suwayda province within 48 hours. Druze militias will assume local security under the form of a community self-police force. The US and Turkey will oversee the implementation through neutral civil organizations and technical monitoring teams. At a glance, this looks like a model peace deal. But upon closer reading, it's clear Damascus no longer has an official presence in Suwayda. Control has shifted to a non-government armed group in a province bordering Israel, under the supervision of two external powers, Washington and Ankara. This isn't just a temporary ceasefire. It's a quiet acknowledgement that the al-Bashar government cannot enforce sovereignty over its own territory. What's more dangerous is the Druze forces in Suwayda are not a unified entity. They are a complex network that includes traditional militia leaders, conservative religious factions, young activists opposed to Damascus, and long-standing pro-Israel elements operating under the radar. This means one hard truth: the signing of the agreement does not mean everyone in Suwayda agrees to stop fighting. And every time one disgruntled faction pulls out of the deal, Israel gains another justification to strike. The cycle of conflict, intervention, agreement, collapse repeats endlessly, and no one can tell what's real and what's strategy anymore. The presence of the US and Turkey in the ceasefire deal signals something deeper. Syria's influence structure is being reshaped. Russia and Iran, once Assad's key pillars, were entirely absent from the negotiations. The US plays the role of technical guarantor and international communicator. Turkey controls the north influence in Kurdish areas. Israel, though not at the table, dominates realities on the ground with firepower. In this setting, the al-Bashar government resembles a powerless envoy left to watch as global powers like Suwayda can shake Damascus, Tel Aviv, and Ankara. It's no longer an internal conflict. It's the news for an active nation-state, but a chessboard for regional powers competing for influence. Israel has long made it clear southern Syria is a zone of With borders operating too close to this area, whether it's the Syrian army, Iran-backed militia, as a threat. But unlike before, Israel no longer limits itself to defensive reactions. Now it strikes first to shape the battlefield and send a message to Erdogan. And the striking: no United States, no UN Security Council. Israel has become an independent actor with the power to write its own rules of engagement. While the US gradually pulls back, Russia is bogged down in Ukraine, and Iran is consumed by domestic crises. Turkey has emerged as the one strong and still ambitious. British forces in the north and the guardian of the Suwayda ceasefire. Erdogan, with his experience in border control, deep influence in Idlib, and ability to negotiate on multiple fronts, is steadily expanding Turkey's role as the shaper of Syria's future, at least in the border regions. But that directly challenges Israel's interests. And the conflict in Suwayda is just wanting to maintain influence but unwilling to get bogged down, hoping for regional stability. War. As a result, America's role is no longer that of a dominant force. Washington agreed to monitor the ceasefire, but did not commit to military support if it collapses. It's Israel and Turkey to compete, and turning Syria into a testing ground for new models. No matter who holds power in Damascus, Syria, today is no longer a country that determines its own fate. In the north, Turkey controls the border and influences Kurdish forces. In the south, Israel acts without warning. In the east, semi-armed factions operate like microstates. In the center, the al-Shar its own borders. With over 70% of its territory outside, authority is shaped by firepower, diplomacy, and external views. A government may announce reforms, negotiate ceasefires, or declare sovereignty, but if it cannot enforce authority in peripheral regions, especially those with distinct ethnic structures, then all political commitments become fragile. In Suwayda, the Druze community's response was not merely an act of self-defense, but a reflection of a long-standing truth. Central power is not recognized without reliable, visible presence. The issue isn't the lack of rules, but that stakeholders don't believe those rules can be applied fairly. In such conditions, even minor deviations can be seen as signs of bias, leading to action outside institutional frameworks. Syria now exists in a state of temporary ceasefire, not full-scale war, but far from lasting peace. The truce in Suwayda, even under international supervision, isn't enough to erase the roots of violence, as trust among communities has never been restored since the civil war. The question now is, can this nation rebuild a political structure capable of managing internal interests while avoiding entanglement in regional power struggles? Or will it remain an unstable crossroads in the post-American order of the Middle East? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and share your perspective. If you're interested in neutral multi-angle analysis like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss upcoming content.